My name is Charles Tidwell. I'm the VP of Social Bakers across Asia Pacific, and I'm based here, and luckily to be based here in Singapore. Today, we are really privileged to have with us Aaron Gomez as our guest. And if you aren't familiar with Aaron and his amazing career right now, trust me, at the end of this session, you'll be wanting to getting to know him personally, and you'll be pinging him on LinkedIn with lots of questions. So I look forward to that. Aaron, for the most part of his career, he's been with agencies working with some fabulous brands that you are all familiar with. That includes Samsung, MasterCard, H&M, Audi, Heineken, Facebook, Spotify. If I listed them all out, we'd be here for an extra hour or 2 hours. I don't think we're going to go there. But then he did take time out between his agency life, and Aaron spent time at probably one of the most innovative and creative brands in Southeast Asia, and that was Gojek. And at Gojek, Aaron was the VP of Digital Strategy. Before we get into the weeds and share more on whether data and content, are they friends, foes, or frenemies, I want to ensure that you have access to myself and, most importantly, Aaron. If you look in the box below you, you'll see a Q&A button. Please, I encourage you to ask as many questions as possible. We've got people behind the scenes that will be able to answer those questions for you. Some of them will make their way to myself and to Aaron. So please, 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 I encourage you to ask as many questions as possible. If you're not familiar with Social Bakers, let's go on to the next slide. If you're not familiar with Social Bakers, I would really ask you to go over to socialbakers.com. I would really encourage you to check us out on Instagram, where we have so much amazing content we're updating on a daily basis. Social Bakers, our view, content is the currency of social. Content has never been so important as it has been now, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that with Aaron and the role of big storytelling and hero content. So we help brands intelligently engage with their prospects and customers. And we support this process throughout an intelligent workflow so brands can engage throughout the customer lifecycle and continue that process in an ongoing way. Okay, Aaron, you're sitting there very quietly. Are you ready?
I'm very ready. Thanks, Charles. Yeah, you're too
ready. Okay, so over to you, ladies and gentlemen. A big virtual round of applause to Aaron Gomez. And Aaron's going to smash this out the park. Let's go, Aaron.
All right. Thanks, Charles. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. But just if you haven't known, I've got a little somebody behind me overlooking me, just in case I see the wrong thing. But that's Gary. So Gary's the owner of VaynerMedia. I will be taking you a little bit through basically what the agency kind of stands for, but also through that it kind of uncovers a lot of questions about the kind of the format of the agency, what we believe in our cultures, but also a lot of connections to the bringing context back to the narrative today, which is data being friends, enemies, or frenemies. Yeah. So as Charles said, if you've got questions, please drop it down the bottom. We're more than happy to answer them. So just to start off, I'm sure a lot of you may be asking, you guys have probably heard of Gary, but maybe you've not really heard of what VaynerMedia does. So we basically, yeah, definitely we're not your typical agency. People do think we do a lot of media focused efforts, but on the background, I think we kind of started out as a community management setup. So Gary started this quite some time back as community management, which moved on to more creative work, brand work, and media, mainstream media. But we're still going back to the core of not being a typical agency. But what does this mean to data? Yeah. So because of that, I think the way we're set up and how we use data, we're very different. And the reason we say this is, if coming from my experience and dealing with friends in the past, from different media agencies, creative agencies, the way we look at it is very much from a streamlined process that has been running the same for almost, you could say, 40 to 50 years, right? I think of late, things have changed with digital coming into the foray and so forth. But for Vayner, I think the biggest difference is we were founded on the mobile phone, not Madison Avenue. Now, for many of you from the agency side, you guys would know what Madison Avenue is. Very familiar place. For those who don't, so this is probably where most of the big six agencies started in New York. I think if you guys watch the movie, the series, sorry, Mad Men, you'll get a better picture. So we're not like these traditional agencies in terms of the culture, the character, because we were started by a wine guy. He's not a madman. So Gary actually started off doing content to kind of help out his family business. His dad's a liquor store, on a corner shop liquor store, right? And all of us know, I mean, if you had a mainstream liquor store, how do you stand out from the rest, from so many varieties that exist in New York City? So Gary started up Wine Library, and for him, content, that was the initial part of, on YouTube, how content kind of drove interest in terms of how he differentiated his business from the rest. And I think that's where we kind of saw how he wanted to build this whole empire of people who make content, who actually knows how to kind of build content that works for the new generation of consumers. Even for the older generation, people who are using platforms, new digital, immersing themselves in new digital touch points. It was a whole new era from what we were used to, like 40 years ago. And the one thing, Gary actually always says is he doesn't want to sell to a holding company. So we will never be part of this big six. And of course, I think the way we kind of do our content is to prove there's a new landscape requirement for the marketing mindset. Hence why VaynerMedia kind of got to media itself. So if you look at it, the agency, there's both media and creative. We don't see it as a part. The approach is very different from many of the agencies that exist today. So this is just kind of the bare crux of how VaynerMedia is set up, right? And who's the owner. So if you look at me, Avery, she's the head of the agency at the office in Singapore. Above her is Gary. So it's a very, very lean kind of operation. He gets involved in a lot of the stuff that we do day to day. So that's kind of talking a little bit about the agency. Now let's go a little bit about how we think differently. And this is where the use of data comes in immensely. Yeah? So for us, the three core things that drives us, and this is something that many of you guys who are starting to do content today would realize, you need to first have strong attention of what's going on in the world of social, in the world of pop culture, in the world of relevance, in different countries. This is key. Culture is something that I think most of us have heard of. Everybody has a different opinion on what it is, but we all know that culture is something you don't undermine. Culture is big, and culture is something we kind of showcase or deliver through the work that we do. And empathy is a strong part of VaynerMedia. If this is something, we were in New York, the whole Singapore office went to New York to do the whole kind of induction of how the teams kind of set up, how do they work with different departments and so forth. And there was a very strong of camaraderie between people. The empathy that people have for each other was huge, because if you don't have that, it's very hard for you to kind of attain attention in culture. So this is the three core values that we always look at it, because it's important, because this is where we realize we meet the consumers where they care. And to do that, you need to understand what are the right platforms, what are they doing with your content, and of course, when is it relevant to post the content to get the highest yield of earned impressions, for example. So this three is something that we adopt every day in the work that we do. And for us, the reason this happens is because the game is changing. Frenemies emerge actually, and I'll explain why. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with this slide. It's kind of cliche. We all know, everyone knows that, we used to watch TVCs and stuff, and now it's moved from the TV to mobile. But actually, I feel we need to correct this, because the scene of mobile has also actually increased a lot of people watching prime time, maybe not terrestrial television, but maybe on-demand television or streaming, because they watch it in two ways. And one of the interesting part is when we did our deep dive and kind of try to understand this behavior. You see the light blue lines is basically the minutes of the shows, and the dark blue lines are the peak periods of when we have those ad breaks, right? And this is where pre-post shows, this is where mobile usage goes up. So this just kind of proves to us that there's no such thing as one thing I really can't stand is when you go into a room and someone says, oh, we're going to put all our money in digital, and we forget that it's not really about that. It's actually looking at what works. How do we drive our content that's going to engage people through multiple different platforms, right? And that story comes out very important. How you start the story, where the touch point really engages the person, and how it continues. I feel that this is not really happening a lot today. Some of the brands, the larger brands, like I think Nike does this really well to a certain extent. You got storytelling brands that does this really well as well. So having this kind of change really coming in, where the frenemies come in, is there's no such thing as TV not working anymore, because the whole context of digital being digital and ATL or mainstream media being that, and people kind of look at it from two different spectrums. It doesn't work that way. It kind of engages together. And this is how we look at approaching work when we actually talk to our clients. So we don't go in saying, hey guys, we need to be doing content. I think the first thing we do is we go in and we kind of hack culture first. And I'm pretty sure if there's some of the people from agencies here would understand, because they're probably seeing these from requests from their clients, like starting social war rooms, for example. You've seen some of the really good agencies in Singapore, some of the local startup agencies, independent agencies do really well. And you've got the agencies like TBW, for example, which I used to work with, does this really well with Singapore Tourism Board. So and you see a lot of this kind of information coming in. You see a lot of the brand managers, the marketing directors starting to kind of open up their view of, hey, you know what? The way I approach marketing can't be dictated by how much paid media I get. It's about a mixture of how much paid media I get versus earned reach as well. And this is the big kind of changing. I think the kind of the kind of the matrix, right, where you have that point where the apex, where people are going to suddenly wonder that maybe I should be thinking about how I blend this together. And media agencies are also ramping up in this space as well. Yeah. So we all know it's not really about one ice cream to all targets. We kind of break our approach with different kind of content to different cohorts. When we see cohorts, we're looking at audiences. We're not really looking at numbers these days. It's not like 15 to 24, 34 to 44. It's basically personas and people, passion or interest, or what drives people. And this is where content comes to life. So when we approach doing these different audiences, media and creative always works hand in hand. I think one of the things, if some of you don't realize, social media today is pay to play. I know a lot of us talk about TikTok being free engagement, is the best place to put out content. Yes, it's true, but it's also free range, where you're doing content that you're getting the results, but you're not sure where these results are coming from as well. Yes, it gives you massive engagement, but I think you need to look at it from the good aspects of what's coming, but also the weaker points that delivers for the platform. So what we do here is we look at media, and we also look at the content, and we see how media can actually drive organic or earned reach as well, to kind of deliver results that we want. Now, the current game is awareness. We are trying to move this more towards relevance. And when we say relevance, we actually put in a lot of attention filters for relevance. And this has got to do a lot with sentiment analysis. It's got a lot to do with the kind of responses people do or provide in the content that we do. It's also got a lot to do with what public space are talking about. And this is going to be shared later on. One of the big campaigns we did recently in New York for the Super Bowl, which is the Mr. Peanut campaign for planters. I'll talk a little bit about that later in terms of what relevance, how it's important to what we do today. Now, proxy benchmarks and real-time sales results. This is very marketing speak, but I think it's best if I show you guys in example in one of the case studies later. So just explaining about how we kind of break this information up, and we kind of target different audiences and cohorts. This is where for us data becomes our closest friend, because for us we've kind of built this whole framework around the volume model. We call it the Vayner volume model. And if many of you guys are not familiar with this, this is kind of our little kind of is our bread and butter kind of business. And it's about turning up the volume of business results. So when I was talking about TikTok earlier, a lot of people are saying, hey, you know what, this is great, content's going to get me as much reach as possible and whatnot. But you have to understand, at VaynerMedia, we also look at how this content is going to deliver business results, sales uplifts. We look at two tangents, not just one aspect of content creation. We also look at how this is going to first build brand and build desire of people wanting to attain this product. So this is something that the Vayner volume model works on. I won't talk too much about it. I'll talk a little bit about how it's kind of working. So the critical shift on how what this model kind of solves is we are moving towards a more subjective creative process designed to be right. Now, if a lot of you are familiar with working in existing brands, existing clients and agencies, we all know that we put our eggs in one basket. We come up with the perfect creative, we come up with the perfect plan for campaign, media, strategy, and we launch. And then we stand back and we hope, right, that this is going to deliver because of our forecast, what we think did really well, or how we kind of look at seasonality of past campaigns and say, hey, you know what, this is going to work. And the worst part is when it comes back and doesn't show the results, and then everybody starts to panic, right? So I think that approach for us at VaynerMedia is different. We don't look at it. We don't look at our creative design to be right. We looked at our creative, or the engineering of our creative design, to finding right. And finding right means a lot of data signals out there that's going to feed back to us to tell us how people are reacting to our content. How can our content be optimized to achieve business outcomes? So this is the critical shift. This is what the Vayner volume model tries to solve for a brand. And this is not done overnight, definitely. This is something that you need to get good at, and it always starts with a foundational strategy that we work with our clients. We have, of course, it starts with a State of the Union briefing where we kind of look at what are the weaknesses, what are the points, what's the status or the existence of the content currently, and then from there we kind of build audiences. We look at what is our channel strategy, and we kind of develop the different audiences of cohorts. Now, this can go up, like, for example, one of our clients, Olay, we did up to 300 pieces of content to test. Now, this content, I'm not referring to, like, production, you go and shoot somewhere, you get like beautifully shot pictures. It's just taking basic assets that the client has, that the brand has, and we cut it and we break it down into different kind of creative modes, messaging that targets different audiences. We call this content DJing, right? And content DJing just means taking a main asset and cutting it down into many different assets that we can test. And now, when that happens, we do execution analysis. Now, this is where we iterate our execution. So from those, like, for example, 300 pieces of content, there might be 3 or 4 that actually hits kind of a point with the audience, right? And then we put more money behind this to see how it works. And from this is where we scale winning ideas. This is where we come back to our client and say, hey, client A, Mr. Client, you want these 3 ideas that these 300 ideas, there's 3 that's really trending, right? People are giving good feedback. The sentiment is fantastic. There's a lot of people giving ideas around how this idea could go big. And this is how we move from small bets to big bets. So these are some of the terminologies that we use internally. When we say small bets, it's about, let's just throw little of this small piece of content, put some money behind it, test and see what works. And then if some comes back and it's like fishing, it kind of hits, you hit a really big, a big catch. This is where you scale those ideas up. And a lot of this has got to do with analysis, insights. If you're looking at using social platforms, for example, like social bakers, we use them. You're looking at using tools like social listening tools that actually measure sentiment. And of course, you need great community managers that can work with the native platform, dashboards, right? And understanding how your content works. And this is basically the structure of how the Vayner volume model goes. Of course, there's a lot more detail into this, which I'm not going to go through, but if you can look at this, this model basically is very different from how a lot of agencies work today. And because we understand the value of media, we understand how this can actually be a great measuring point in determining subjective points of view. And we also understand that great creative comes from hacking culture, knowing what really works in your market and driving that relevance with them. So this is how we kind of use data as much as possible to our advantage, being a friend for us. Now, some ways that we make love to data in the past. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Baby Peanut. If you guys are not familiar with this campaign, This is something they just ran recently at the Super Bowl in the US. Of course, this campaign actually was a big hit for the client. It drove about 11.4 billion impressions. This could go around the world 1.4 times. Largest earned program in Kraft Heinz history. And there's a reason for this as well. And when Avery first sent me the deck and the team from New York shared all the results, the first thing that struck me is I wanted to see, I was really curious to find out how did they execute this campaign, because it was a brilliant story, right? I mean, how many big brands would kill off their mascot? It's so hard to do. I mean, imagine if you could be a fly on the wall and use the strategists, the creatives, and the account servicing people who convince the client to do that. It's really brilliant, right? And this happened because there's a lot of work put into the pre-story, the build-up of how we went into killing off this mascot, right? And I wanted to share a little bit of this is kind of an insight kind of analysis of what we did. And this has got a lot to do with storytelling. Now, if you look at how we kind of mark or plan the different kind of points in terms of when we release posts or when we come up with different kind of conversations, you can see that the volume of social conversations changes over time depending on what we release, depending on how we use PR and social media. And from experience, even working at Gojek when I was doing the campaign with VJ, our team, right, when we were in Creative Labs, we had to do a campaign where we tried to maximize a simple idea with Rich Brian. So if you guys are familiar with the campaign with Rich Brian at Idiot Rising, we actually delivered a Gojek delivery all the way to New York City to deliver food to this guy in less than 24 hours. And that sparked a huge story. And from experience, you need to capitalize on that in the first 3 to 4 days. If you don't do that, it's gone. And you can see it here as well, right? Just from the results here in terms of the overall campaign, you've got peaks and moments where it dips and whatnot, but that's how social media works. Content in the world today doesn't even last more than 2 days. And this is how we needed to try to drive a really good storytelling around here. Now, if we look in terms of on the game day itself, so to give you a bit of context, Mr. Peanut had kind of 3 different main periods of the campaign. The preceding, which we talk a little bit about a journey or an adventure of Mr. Peanut and how he actually dies. And then you've got the game, which is the Super Bowl itself. And the Super Bowl is where we actually have, we didn't reveal it, but we announced the rebirth of Baby Nut, right? So at the funeral of Mr. Peanut, Baby Nut was born because Mr. Kool-Aid, his tear or something dropped in the ground and he grew out, right? So then there was another huge spike. And if you look at the tangent of how that spike kind of tapers out to post-campaign, this is how we look at storytelling. This is how we look at spreading the content so that we can hit peaks, look at how this content is going to be relevant during Super Bowl. And this is where community management and strategy comes in critical in working with the creatives to develop these creatives in a very, very fast-paced environment. One thing I've got to say though, working in this agency from my past, I've really learned to work super fast, right? And working with the creatives, we have very, very loose frameworks of how we come back with changes, we iterate ideas and so forth. And you have to be, because the storytelling moves so fast. As you can see here, this is time-based on per hour, yeah? So I'm just saying this because for brands who want to take on this whole content marketing space, it's not something that's palatable for many people. Number one, you have to look at the people you're working with, the partners you're working with, and also if in this country, or in the countries you're in, is this something that's going to pick up? Like we always talk about, when hey, Super Bowls it's a great time, that's in America, right? But what's different about us here in Singapore? And we always say our big moments are like Chinese New Year, right? I mean, festive seasons. And this is something big for us, and this is where we need to kind of look at what are those cultural events and moments that happen in the year. We call it cultural calendars, right? And that will give us the highest amount of reach. And this is just kind of giving relevance to an actual campaign that we did with Mr. Peanut or Planters, right? But this is something that works even with campaigns that I've run in the past. And this is very, very, very important to know that data, I learned this from a very, very, very smart person in the past who taught me that data is never something that is accurate, is good enough. And good enough helps you decide what you need to do, because nothing is accurate. Nothing is real. I mean, behaviors change, it gives you heuristics and develops into algorithms or theories, but it's never going to be an accurate depiction of what's going to happen. It's probably forecast at best. But if you learn to realize that data is not the end to the solving all your problems, is a good gauge of knowing where you need to be, I think it's a good start already. And yeah, one of the things that comes with data being a foe, of course, with the good, there's also the bad. But I mean, I'm saying this is also with experience of what I've been through in the past when I was doing some work for Samsung. So when you do campaigns like this, you're going to get some feedback from platforms, not because it's something that that they're doing it just out of spite, but because there are some rules and regulations. But we try to find a way around it. So in this case, we created different accounts to share memes, to share content, because on Twitter and Instagram, if you actually create it natively on those platforms and share it, it's a lot easier to kind of spread rather than putting it on a website or whatnot. But Twitter kind of took down the accounts because they were not belonging to real people, for example. So this attributed to about 3% impact to the impressions, but it wasn't a lot. But it's good to note that when you do stuff like this, you need to be really clear about your touch points and where the data pools are coming from. Because in our case, it was like it was Twitter, but if it was the main platform like Instagram, it would have impacted our numbers, our data funnel in a big way. So this is just some examples that I wanted to share a little bit about what we've done, what Vayner stands for. But I'm more than happy to kind of, Charles, you can barrage me with any questions, or I'm sure there's a lot of questions from the audience as well. So,
Aaron, I love that, and thank you very, very much. I see 3 questions in the Q&A. So team, please, in the bottom of your screen, you see the Q&A. Let's get to those in a minute, Aaron. But I'm bursting with questions, and I got one I want to ask myself. Actually, I've got a lot I want to ask, but I'll restrict myself. We talked about data, frenemies, foes. There's a lot I hear where it's narratives. Is data leading to the narrative, or is the narrative driving the data? So a lot of people will look at data and they'll think, hey, that's good, but it's not the story I want to tell. I'm just going to take some of my favorite little bits of that data, and then I sort of tell the story from there. Or there are other brands and agencies that will say, okay, we'll rely solely on the data and let the data tell the truth. What's your thinking and opinions on that?
Well, first off, Charles, this is a very, very good question. But I'm also not going to be a hypocrite to say that I've not gone through that as well, right? I mean, honestly, in my different lives in different agencies, yes, I've seen that happen. I've seen both sides of the story, right? And I just want to kind of bring attention to what I was saying recently. I mean, just earlier about drawing a line in understanding where data can help you. Now, whether it leads a narrative or the narrative leads it, it really depends on what you're trying to solve. So for us, truth, I believe truth is relative in terms of how you position it, right? It's the same goes with data. And if data is good enough, it's not accurate, it can lead to many different possibilities, right? Many different heuristics. It's just what you want to choose that would work, or what is the best or combination of different heuristics that's going to deliver the best result. So to answer that question, I believe that if you can draw that line and you use it really carefully, you can use it in either way. So in this case, if data is used to lead the narrative, so you're trying to find as many validations to prove to a point that this particular creative or this particular content works, it's fine. But you also have another point of the tangent where I personally have had stories told to me about this recently, actually, about a meeting with a huge Singapore brand, right? And there were a couple of agencies in there, and someone was asked to go up and present this huge, present data visualization and regression analysis, which was fantastic, right? I mean, this is one of the best things about data, because you can visualize it, you can make people understand it so easily. But the problem is he was shot down immediately just by one question, and that was, how is this relevant to Singapore? And no one could answer that question. It was like dead silence, right? And for me, these kind of questions kind of answer back that you may be really good at finding, data leads a narrative, right? But if it leads a narrative and it's got no connection to what you're trying to solve in relevance of culture, that's going to be a huge, huge problem for you. So from both sides of the story, I kind of see there's no real action of saying it's this or that. I really think it looks at the situation you're in as well and how you're using the data, the different signals that you're using as well.
Thanks, Aaron. Nice answer. It's a tough one as well, right? Hey, look, we got lots of questions, so let's go through some of these. I'm going to go to the last one first. They didn't leave a name. The question is, Aaron, what's the holy grail of social data for purposes of campaign M&E? I'm not quite sure, I'm sorry, what M&E is. Maybe that person could say what M&E is. Aaron, do you know what M&E mergers and no? Do you know what M&E could be?
I need to get context to this. Campaign M&E, no.
Okay, if the person who asked that question could come back and just say what they mean by M&E, that would be great.
Evaluation. Okay, all right. Okay, so what's the holy, so just repeat the question. So what's the holy grail of social data for purpose of campaign evaluation and monitoring? So for me, I can answer it in relevance to what I'm doing right now with Vayner. The holy grail is for us is earned impressions. This is how we look at it. So for us, so how we look at it is earned impressions. I'm not saying that paid media is not delivering on certain metrics. It does, but we try our best to do a combination of both paid and organic to drive as much earned impressions as we can. So that is how we look at it in respects to content marketing that we're doing today.
Aaron, a quick question on that, expanding from that. Do you think with the platforms it is pay to play right now? Or do you think that good content can really drive a lot of the engagement that the brands need to have?
So to a certain extent, right now, there's two ways we can approach social media. One is if you really have a strong strategy around how you're driving social to conversion, right? And the other aspect is if you want to drive brand association with new groups of audiences. So if you're a new brand and you're trying to kind of build an affinity with 3 different groups of people, right, on the social space where they're going to have people using your product, talking about it, then kind of the metrics are a little bit different. But if you have a brand and you're looking at it to be pay to play, yes, to a certain extent, a lot of the platforms today are that way. So you need to be driving. It's not about you. Probably with the exception of TikTok or maybe LinkedIn, you probably won't get a lot of results just posting on your social page this current day and age, unless if you've been doing a lot of heavy lifting. So when I was working on Samsung back in the day, before we had organic went in, a lot of the campaigns that we did on Facebook back then through Facebook campaigns was driving a lot of people to kind of build on a huge audience. We had the right audience on our platform, and the right audience, the fans that we had, helped grow that social reach that we wanted. So it really starts off with that. But to your question, Charles, it is generally a pay-to-play game today.
Yeah, it's a shame, and I hope that changes a little bit. We got a great question here from Christine Lim. Thanks, Christine. What data pointers do you think it's crucial to add when presenting a social strategy? So what is the information that you need to present to brands or to senior management to maybe to convince them that social is the right platform in which to engage?
I think in this case, if you're looking at it at a larger scale, right? I mean, the data pointers can also mean in terms of performance of posts, right? So post level engagement. So if I'm trying to convince my client or brands that I want to do a greater creative, then I'm looking at how people are reacting to that particular post. So engagement rate is probably the basic, most simple way of how you look at stuff. But if you're looking at it at a macro level in terms of developing a social strategy, then you're really looking at sentiment. Sentiment can drive up to different ways. You can look at positive and negative sentiment, or you can also look at sentiment in an array of content buckets that align with the brand value. So if my brand value stood for trust, confidence, and innovation, how is that connected to audiences on social media? In what way? So trust can be said in so many different ways, right? And this is where you need to test this with your audiences. It doesn't happen immediately. So over time, when you do sentiment analysis, understanding how your content buckets are resonating with this audience, it helps you develop your creative better. And this kind of envelopes back to your social strategy in terms of what is your role. And this is something I've been harping on over the last couple of years, right? I mean, I've always looked at value creation. Something I've learned in business transformation. What is value creation today? Value creation is something where it harnesses within a product. It generates use for people. So if you're posting up content that's just fun, TikTok videos that have people just dancing around and stuff, and it's not developing into something that's relevant, you're probably going to have a 5-second recall, right? So how do you create value? I think that's the one question that cannot be put into data points, but it's more in terms of behavioral and how people are connecting with your content pillars.
Yeah, that's a nice answer. Not an easy one to answer. And there's a segue to that question, a question from Gabriel. You talked about the killing of Mr. Peanut with Planters. How did you convince to the senior management that this was the right strategy, and what sort of resistance did you get, and how was that resistance managed?
Okay, so thanks for the question, Gabriel. So I can't answer in totality of what happened. I've heard of stuff that happened, so I can share with you what I know. It was hard. It was definitely hard, but I know a huge part of it has got to do with Gary as well. And this is why Gary's charisma and confidence come into play, because a lot of brands actually vest that interest in him, because he dares to say the things that most people can't. But also he actually walks the walk. He says it, but he also does it. So a lot of it has got to do with a charismatic leader that can drive the conversation. But I think what I'm trying to say here also, it has a lot to do with the culture and the people that he has. When I talked earlier in the presentation about the personality, the values that we have, I think Gary's values are very much intrinsic in us. And that's how we kind of push or bulldoze our way through with clients. There's something similar that you would also have to kind of adopt with your approach, right? I mean, there's always going to be that one person in your team that's going to be a fantastic negotiator, a fantastic person to tell a story. And that's important, because if you can't tell a story really well, you can't convince someone, I think that's where it falls short. So I'm sorry I can't give you more, but I can share with you some of my experiences that we were pushed to sell ideas that were crazy. For example, the Rich Brian campaign, it was something nuts, because there were so many people that were putting it down because they said, oh, this is going to be a PR nightmare, because they didn't want people to start thinking that Gojek was going to be moving to US and stuff like that. But I think the owners of the company believed in the idea. They really liked it. They also kind of have this free spirit, innovative, risk taker kind of mentality. And because of that, one of the owners pushed the idea through. He really made ways, paved ways for us to kind of drive this and move it ahead. And it became a huge success. So you can see, you can take some kind of similarities in that, because it's not one person trying to convince. I think it's a group of people trying to convince the brand. And it's not going to happen every day. You've got to choose your battles wisely. That's what I believe.
Yeah, if I were to interpret that, Aaron, it's almost like you have to believe in what's going to work, so other people will also believe in that. And Gary is one of those very rare individuals with that level of charisma, that level of constant and consistent energy, that he doesn't give up, and he won't give up. And if he really believes in something, he will fight and fight and fight for that. Does Gary, so everyone knows Gary and Gary's sort of personality, and they will have seen him on all the social channels. Does he attend any pitches that you do in this region? And if he does, a brand surprise that sometimes he's in the background and turns up?
Yeah, it's funny. It's like a fanboy or fangirl moment sometimes. So we had a couple. He sat in just recently, 2 weeks ago. We had a pitch, and he sat in, and a lot of people were. We've actually had one person have to go back and change and put on makeup, because that kind of fangirl moment came up. But it was really fun, because Gary is a very nice person, and he's got a way of explaining how things work. When he did that, I think it really kind of struck a connect with the client, where they realized that this person is someone who really cares and connects with every one of these people across the offices. And that's something that kind of, it's kind of, it helps us along the way, but it also shows us that, we have someone that's got our back.
Yeah, interesting. I bet there's a few people that would be surprised. I'm going to take one last question from the Q&A, and then I've got one more question myself because of time. We have someone ask, how would you approach content strategy for sports marketing? We're doing 12 to 15 posts a day. So that's a lot of content that they're putting out there and having to find the right time to post that content. They have limited budget, and they're relying heavily on organic performance. So maybe that, in some respects, that's similar to Gojek. A lot of content going out. You've got to find that balance between paid and organic. What were some of your learnings there, Aaron, at Gojek, and what would you make? How would you help this individual asking this question?
Well, number one, 12 to 15 posts a day is, I mean, for me, that's a lot. That means you guys are really vested in this. So that's good, right? But I think in aspects to something we need to understand as well. And I'm assuming that the platforms you guys are using are predominantly Instagram and Facebook. Correct me if I'm wrong, yeah. But I think if you look at it in hindsight over the last couple of years, the engagement rate for Instagram has dropped because, number one, there are far too many people posting our content on that platform. Now, if you look at it, the more you post, law of averages would tell you that your engagement will drop. Same goes with engagement rates for anything that we do for our pages, right? The more fans we have, our engagement is definitely going to drop. It's just, that's just the law of numbers. So I would say my approach for sports events, and this is something that I have a passion about as well in the back. So if you're looking at esports, you're looking at soccer, football, this is important because giving you an example of, if let's say you're a content provider, so you're maybe a sports casting company, right? And you're providing content to your audience or events. The one key bit here is basically you're looking at the timeliness of when your content is going out, because of the seasonality and the impact of the events that's taking place. So either it's going to be watching like a cast event, an event that's going to be taking place, or you're looking at moments that's happening around. So the people that are playing the game, the backstories that are happening about those two games. I think one of the ways is organic reach is never going to drive this up. But I think if it's sports as in total, the first people you look at is your audience, the people that actually connect with you. And then from there you build up. So it's not having organic just on itself. You need to have some space to kind of push it out to the right people, get that conversation starting, but develop content that's going to be relevant and high value for them. Some simple ways is like maybe 30-second chats with this athlete, right, on doing something at home during COVID, for example. I know it sounds very, very mundane, very pedestrian, but stuff like this, if posted at the right time, at the moment where this event could have been taking place, but because of COVID, it's not, can actually drive a lot of engagement, a lot of conversation. So timing is important. The use of your assets is important in terms of how you develop your key talent and your narrative around the stories in those sports events. But number one is you still need to put a bit of money behind reaching out the right people that's going to start talking about it. You don't need to constantly invest money behind them. You're looking at like what I called when I was doing work in the past, the sandwich strategy, right? Sandwich strategy just means 3 posts in a week, for example. You don't have to put all your money in the 3 posts. You look at what's going to actually drive the most yield for you, but you pad it up with 2 or 3 organic posts in between. You'll see that you get a little bit of almost in like that kind of spillover effect that happens. But which is what I'm saying. It's really about timing, but you can't be producing 15 pieces of content organically. It's not going to help you in the long run.
Aaron, I've learned a couple of things from you today. Content DJing and sandwich strategy. I like it.
It's just it's mostly out of mistakes, Charles. A lot of this comes from learning from mistakes, and then you tend to try different things. So yeah.
I like it. I like it a lot. Gary, I want to wrap this Aaron, I want to wrap this up. I've got one last question for you. There's been this huge shift from analog to digital, atoms to bits. It's almost like from vinyl to MP3, and maybe there are some people on the call here that absolutely love vinyl, still have their vinyl collection, and just take unparalleled care of those records, because they are very fragile. Vinyl is going through, or has been going through, a renaissance, and probably will continue to go through a renaissance. So we've gone from atoms to bits, so everything's been a lot less tactile. So much is online, and maybe it's lost that creative element. And do you think we'll go through a similar time warp within advertising, where it will have to come back to a lot more about the creative, but the creative in the story? And what about sort of the traditional advertising? How is that going to have to shift and change in the next 24 months?
Okay, so the first part of the question is, yes, I do believe that you will see re-emerging trends of older, I would say, older topics of interest or points of interest coming back, or seeing a resurgent kind of approach in how people use it today. It may be different, but the core of understanding what vinyl is and all that, yes, it would be there. I personally think this would happen because if you look at the split of people that's going to be within the consumer segments, or that's going to be running things in the next 10 years, you're going to see a large majority of Gen X and Gen Y that's going to be kind of flooding the markets. And these two group of audiences is fantastic. You've got one that doesn't want to be told what to do, and you've got one that's trying to drive what is right for their personal interests and experiences and whatnot. But when you bring this together, you can see a lot of older topics of interest being brought back through these platforms, these new social platforms, in using that. I think if you look at, even Gary has been talking about sports cards coming back, basketball cards. I used to collect them as well. I'm thinking about what to do with them, but yeah, so this kind of stuff would come back. But on the second part of the question about how agencies, would we see this to agencies? Now, first things first, Charles, I think agencies, I don't think agencies are being disrupted. I think the sector is being disrupted. I think agencies they do what they do best. And some brands still require the services of the big six, because they have the coverage, they have the network, they have the experience, and they also have the operational process to get things done. That's something we have to understand, right? Yes, it may happen in a lot slower manner. Yes, there are problems and challenges within that space, but it's not something that's going to wind it out. I think it's going to be, they're a smart bunch of people, so they will know how to work within that. I think you see some agencies disrupting their space in terms of their strategy, how they approach brand strategy. I'll be honest with you, for me, brand strategy, I'm horrific at that. I think even if you look at it from VaynerMedia standpoint, even Gary's point of view, what brand strategy is very different, right? But you see agencies in that space, and yes, they are still going to be there. I think they're just going to be merging the new ways of thinking with some of the ways they operate at a network level. I think that's where that space is going to change.
Yeah, interesting. There's a lot of unknowns. Aaron, I want to say a big thank you for joining us. There's so much we could have talked about. We didn't even touch on the role of AI with creative and consumer engagement. There's a lot of Q&A we didn't get to. So maybe we should think about V2 or round 2. Aaron, a huge thank you, and for taking time out of this. It's very special. To everyone still on the call, I want to say a huge thank you. I'm sure most of you are taking this from home. I just want to say stay safe, be yourself. And I think to stay sane, you've got to go a little bit crazy at times. So also find that time to have some fun. And everybody, thank you very much. Take care and look after yourself. And so that's a bye from me.
Take care. Bye-bye.